A boy who ages out of the system is told he inherited nothing but a key to a forgotten property. What he found there wasn't just a home, but a truth that would force him to choose between a fortune and his family's honor. If you've ever felt like you were starting with nothing, stick with me. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're about to find out what nothing really means. The key was cold. Colder than the Formica tabletop it sat on. Colder than the sterile air pumped through the vents of the director's office. It was old, black iron, with an ornate, clover-shaped head and a long, complicated bit that looked more like a medieval secret than a simple tool for opening a door. It was the only thing in the small cardboard box that felt real. The rest was just the collected debris of a life lived in the margins. A few worn paperbacks, a faded photo of a woman I was told was my mother, and my birth certificate. A document that felt like a clerical error. 18 years, and this was the sum total. A box of paper and a key to nowhere. Mrs. Gable, the director of the Northgate Youth Home, pushed the box across the desk with two perfectly manicured fingers as if it might stain them. Her smile was a thin, practiced line that never reached her eyes. It was the same smile she used for potential donors and state inspectors. Well, Leo, you've officially aged out. Congratulations. The word hung in the air, hollow and absurd. Congratulations on what? On surviving? On reaching the legal precipice where the system could wash its hands of me? Thank you, I said. The words were automatic, a reflex honed by years of placating authority figures. Your file is closed, she continued, tapping a pristine folder on her desk. According to our records, you have no living relatives to be placed with. However, a final probate search flagged a small inheritance from your maternal grandfather, a Mr. Alistair Miller. My heart did a strange, painful lurch. A grandfather. In all my years of asking, of wondering, the official answer was always the same: no one. He passed away over a decade ago, she said, her tone preemptively crushing any hope. There was no money, no assets to speak of, just a piece of property. The estate's lawyer sent this. She nodded at the key. It's for a derelict farmhouse in a town called Sparrow Creek. Apparently, the property taxes were paid up for a few years in advance, so the county never seized it. But from the report I saw, it's likely condemned, uninhabitable. She gave me a look that was meant to be sympathetic, but landed somewhere near pitying. Honestly, Leo, it's probably more of a liability than a gift. You'll have to figure out what to do with it. Sell the land for pennies, maybe, or just walk away. Walk away. That was the theme of my life. People walked away from me. The system was now walking away from me, and her advice was to do the same to the only thing I had ever been given. There's a bus ticket in the envelope with your final stipend, she said, standing up. It was a dismissal. It'll get you to a regional hub. From there, Sparrow Creek is another 2 hours. Good luck, Leo. I picked up the box. It felt both impossibly heavy and pathetically light. I didn't look at her as I left. I walked down the long, polished hallway for the last time, the squeak of my worn-out sneakers echoing like a final, lonely goodbye. The other kids I'd grown up with, my temporary brothers and sisters in this strange institutional family, were in class. I didn't get to say goodbye to them either. You learn not to. People are temporary. Attachments are liabilities. That was lesson number 1 at Northgate. The bus ride was a blur of gray cityscapes melting into the green and brown of the countryside. I sat with the box on my lap, my hand closed around the iron key in my pocket. It was the only solid thing in a world that felt like it was dissolving around me. Mrs. Gable's words echoed in my head. Derelict, condemned, a liability. I should have felt nothing. Hope was a dangerous thing, a fool's currency, but the weight of the key in my palm felt like an anchor. It was a piece of a story that included me, even if it was a broken one. 2 bus changes later, I was on a rattling local liner, the only passenger besides an elderly woman with a bag of groceries. The driver, a man with a thick beard and kind eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Where you headed, son?" "Sparrow Creek," I said. "The old Miller place." His eyes met mine in the mirror again, and I saw that same flicker of pity I'd seen in Mrs. Gable's face, but this time it was mixed with something else. Curiosity. Maybe even a little respect. "Alistair Miller's place? Haven't seen anyone head out that way in years. It's a good walk from the bus stop." "I don't mind walking," I said. When he pulled over at a lonely crossroads marked by a leaning stop sign, he pointed down a narrow gravel road. "It's all the way at the end. Can't miss it. Good luck to you." The bus pulled away, leaving me in a cloud of dust and an unnerving silence. The air was different here. It smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and something wild and clean. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full of unseen life. I adjusted the box under my arm and started walking. The gravel crunched under my feet, a rhythmic, lonely sound. The road was flanked by dense woods, the trees towering over me, their branches interlocking to form a green canopy. I passed a few houses set far back from the road, with peeling paint and yards full of rusted equipment. Then there was nothing but the trees. After what felt like an hour, the road ended. Before me was a rusted skeletal mailbox, tilted at a drunken angle. The name, Miller, barely visible beneath a layer of rust and grime. Beyond it, a dirt driveway, more of a trail really, disappeared into an overgrown thicket. I pushed through weeds and thorny bushes, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. And then I saw it. The house was a skeleton, too. A 2-story farmhouse that might have been white once, now streaked with gray and green mildew. The paint was peeling off in long strips, like sunburnt skin. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't were dark, vacant eyes. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, held up by a prayer. The whole structure seemed to be sighing, slowly surrendering itself back to the forest that crowded in on all sides. A wave of profound disappointment washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. Mrs. Gable was right. It wasn't a home, it was a ruin. It was nothing. My inheritance was a ghost story. I stood there for a long time, the cardboard box growing heavier in my arms, the silence of the place pressing in on me. A cold, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Of course, this was it. This was what I came from, an empty, forgotten, broken thing. I almost turned around right then. I could walk away, just like she said. Hitch a ride back to the city, find a shelter, and disappear. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But my fingers were still wrapped around that iron key in my pocket. It was the only question I had left in the world that might have an answer. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of decay and damp wood, and walked up the creaking, rotten steps of the porch. The front door was a solid slab of oak, weathered and gray, with a large, ornate iron lock plate. It looked formidable, ancient. I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the keyhole with a gritty scrape of metal on metal. For a moment it wouldn't turn. I put my shoulder into it, pushing, twisting with all my weight. Rust and time fought back. I felt a surge of irrational anger. I would not be beaten by a locked door. Not this one. With a final, desperate heave, something inside the lock gave way with a deafening series of clicks and groans. The sound echoed in the oppressive silence. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a deep, consuming darkness. The air that rolled out to meet me was thick and heavy, a physical presence. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long, long time. Dust, mold, dried herbs, and the faint, ghostly scent of wood smoke. I stood on the threshold, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Slowly, shapes began to resolve themselves from the shadows. I was in a large central room. Furniture, draped in white cloths, stood like a congregation of ghosts in the dim light filtering through the grimy, unboarded windows. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of sun, a silent, swirling universe. I stepped inside, my sneakers silent on the thick carpet of dust. The door swung shut behind me with a soft, final thud, plunging me into near darkness again. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt like an archaeologist entering a tomb, a trespasser in my own history. I set the cardboard box down and ran my hand along the wall, searching for a light switch. My fingers found nothing but peeling wallpaper. Of course, the power would have been cut off years ago. Using the faint light from the windows, I began to explore. The white sheets covering the furniture were like shrouds. I lifted one, revealing a sturdy-looking sofa with a floral pattern, the colors muted by time. I pulled another off a grand, upright piano in the corner, its keys yellowed like old teeth. A thick layer of dust covered everything, a gray blanket preserving the scene exactly as it had been left. It was a house holding its breath. I moved from the living area into what must have been a dining room. A long wooden table was surrounded by chairs, one of which was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Every noise felt like a sacrilege. I was afraid to touch anything, afraid to disturb this perfect, silent tableau of a life I never knew. In the center of the main room was a massive stone fireplace, its hearth black with the soot of 1,000 fires. Above it, on a thick wooden mantelpiece, sat a collection of objects, all coated in the same gray dust. A pair of brass candlesticks, a small, carved wooden bird, and a framed photograph. I picked up the photo, wiping the glass with the sleeve of my jacket. It was a black and white picture of a man and a woman, standing in front of this very house when it was still proud and white. The man had a kind, weathered face and a gentle smile. He had his arm around the woman, who was laughing, her head thrown back. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged here. My grandparents. My throat tightened. This was the first time I'd ever seen his face. Alistair Miller. My grandfather, the man who had left me this ruin. I felt a strange mix of resentment and a deep, aching sadness. Why did you leave me? Why did you leave me this? As I set the photograph back down, my fingers brushed against something else. Tucked behind it, propped against the stone, was a single, thick envelope. It was yellowed with age, but the seal was unbroken, and on the front, in a shaky but elegant script, was one word, Leo. My breath caught in my chest. It was for me. It had been waiting here on this mantelpiece for who knows how long. My hands trembled so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper was brittle, and the wax seal crumbled under my thumb. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was the same as on the envelope. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you are a man, and I am long gone. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so much. I know you must have 1,000 questions, and you must feel nothing but anger and confusion toward me, toward the world that left you alone. You have every right to those feelings. I will not ask for your forgiveness, only for your understanding. I need you to know that putting you in the system was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was not abandonment, my boy, it was protection. There were dangers here for you, shadows from your father's life that I could not shield you from otherwise. I chose to let you hate me from a distance, so that you could live to have a choice at all. This house, this land, it may not look like much. It may look like a burden. The world will tell you it is worthless. They are wrong. The house is just a shell, Leo. The real inheritance is the land itself. But it comes with a fight. A company, Blackwood Development, has been trying to take it for years. They are relentless. They will lie to you. They will try to scare you. Do not believe them. Do not let them win. Everything you need to understand is here, in this house. This is your home, if you choose to claim it. It is your story, your legacy. I have left you the tools to fight, and the truth to fight for. Start beneath the hearthstone. Where the fire gives warmth, I left you the tools to stay warm. Be strong, my grandson. I have always loved you, your grandfather, Alistair. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that were now streaming down my face. Protection, not abandonment. The narrative of my life, the one I had built around being unwanted, cracked down the middle. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was thrown away. I cried for the old man who died alone in this dusty house, writing a letter to a grandson he would never see. And for the first time, standing in the cold, silent ruin, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. My grief gave way to a surge of purpose. Start beneath the hearthstone. I knelt before the massive fireplace, the stones cold against my knees. I ran my hands over the flat, gray stones of the hearth, pushing and tapping, searching for a loose one. Near the back, one of them shifted slightly under my palm. My heart leaped. I dug my fingers into the crack, pulling with all my strength. It was heavy, sealed with years of soot and grime, but it finally came free, scraping against its neighbors. Underneath, in a shallow, hollowed-out space, sat a small, dark metal box. It was heavy, solid, and locked with a small, sturdy-looking padlock. I lifted it out. It was cold to the touch. Inside, I knew, were the tools my grandfather had mentioned. The truth. But there was no key. Not in the hollow, not with the letter. The first answer had only led to another, more difficult question. Where was the key to this box? The search for the second key became an obsession. For the next 2 days, I didn't leave the house. I scoured every inch of it, fueled by a handful of stale granola bars I'd brought with me and the water from a rusty hand pump I found out back, which thankfully still worked. The search was a strange kind of archaeology. I was digging through the layers of my own forgotten history, and with each object I touched, I felt closer to the grandparents I'd never known. I started in the living room, going through the drawers of a heavy oak desk. I found old bills, receipts for farm equipment, a half-finished crossword puzzle. In one drawer, I found a stack of my grandmother's journals. Her name was Eleanor. Her handwriting was a graceful, looping cursive. I didn't read them, it felt too much like an invasion of privacy, but I held them, imagining her sitting at this desk chronicling her days. Upstairs, I found their bedroom. A large 4-poster bed stood in the center of the room, still neatly made beneath its layer of dust. In the closet, his clothes still hung on one side, her dresses on the other. I ran my hand over the rough fabric of a flannel shirt. It smelled faintly of sawdust and pipe tobacco. It felt like a handshake across time. I searched every pocket, every shoe, every hat box. Nothing. I found my mother's room, or what I assumed was hers. It was smaller, with faded rose-patterned wallpaper. A collection of small porcelain animals was arranged on a shelf. A worn copy of Alice in Wonderland sat on the nightstand. It was the room of a girl who was loved. In the bottom of her closet, under a pile of old blankets, I found a shoebox full of photographs. There I was, a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket being held by the smiling woman from the photo on the mantel. My mother. In another, she stood with a young man I didn't recognize. He had a handsome, reckless smile. My father. There were no pictures of him with my grandparents. The house was slowly giving up its secrets, but not the one I needed most. I learned that my grandfather was a carpenter and a botanist, his shelves filled with books on woodworking and local flora. I learned my grandmother was a musician who loved to bake, from the sheet music on the piano and the well-used cookbooks in the kitchen. I learned that they had built a life here, a real life, full of love and work and quiet joys. And I learned that it had all ended, somehow, in tragedy and secrets. By the third day, I was exhausted, hungry, and no closer to finding the key. The house was a maze of unanswered questions. I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed supplies, but more than that, I needed information. The letter had mentioned a fight, a company called Blackwood Development. Maybe someone in town knew something. The name the bus driver had mentioned came back to me. Alistair Miller. People here knew him. I walked the long road back to Sparrow Creek. The town, which had seemed so small and desolate on my arrival, now looked different. It looked like a possibility. It was a collection of a dozen or so buildings lining a single main street. A diner, a post office, a gas station, and a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign. I pushed open the door to the store, and a small bell chimed. The inside smelled of coffee beans, sawdust, and old paper. The shelves were crammed with everything from canned goods to fishing lures. Behind the counter stood a woman with kind eyes and a cloud of white hair pinned up in a bun. She looked up from the newspaper she was reading. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice warm. "I hope so," I said, my own voice sounding rough from disuse. "I'm staying out at the old Miller place." Her eyes widened slightly. "Alistair's place? My goodness. I haven't heard of anyone being out there since he passed." "Are you family?" "His grandson," I said. "Leo." A real, genuine smile spread across her face. "Leo, of course. He used to talk about you. Said you were a strong boy." She wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter. "I'm Martha. I run this place. Knew your grandparents my whole life. Eleanor was my best friend." Her eyes grew misty for a moment. Alistair was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but good. He loved this town, and he loved that land. "He mentioned a company," I said, deciding to take the risk. "Blackwood Development." Martha's warm expression soured instantly. "Vultures," she spat, the word sharp and venomous. "They came in about 15 years ago, bought up all the old logging tracts, the abandoned farms, promised jobs, a fancy resort. All they brought was trouble. They wanted your grandfather's land something fierce. It's the last piece of the puzzle for them, connects their whole parcel. He wouldn't sell. Told them to go to hell more times than I can count. It got ugly toward the end. They tried everything to force him out." "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He just held on," she said. "But it wore him down. After Eleanor passed, he was never the same. He got quiet, kept to himself, but he never, ever gave up on that land." She paused, studying my face. "If you're thinking of staying, you should know they won't just let it be. They'll come for you, too." She leaned closer. "Alistair had a lawyer, old man Abernathy, still has his office above the diner. He handled all of Alistair's affairs. If anyone knows what's really going on, it's him. I was standing there in this dusty little town, a ghost from a past I didn't even know. And I had a choice: walk away, like everyone expected, with the knowledge that my grandfather was a fighter who died protecting something for me. Or I could see this through, pick up the fight he'd left behind. If you've ever faced a moment like that, where turning back is easier, but moving forward feels like the only thing that matters. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's get back to that lawyer's office. I thanked Martha, bought a few essentials, bread, cheese, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and walked across the street to the diner. A narrow, steep staircase on the side of the building led up to a door with a frosted glass window. On it, in faded gold letters, were the words, H. Abernathy, Attorney at Law. I took a deep breath and knocked. A gruff voice called out, "It's open!" The office was even more cluttered than the general store. It was one small room, crammed with towering stacks of books and files that threatened to avalanche at any moment. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Behind a massive wooden desk, buried in legal pads, sat a man who looked as ancient as the documents surrounding him. He had a fringe of white hair, thick glasses perched on the end of his nose, and a face etched with the lines of 1,000 small-town dramas. He peered at me over his spectacles. "And who might you be?" "My name is Leo," I said. "I'm Alistair Miller's grandson." The old lawyer's posture changed. He straightened up, a flicker of something sharp and intelligent in his tired eyes. He took off his glasses and rubbed his face, then gestured to a worn leather chair in front of his desk. "Abernathy," he said, extending a wrinkled hand. "Harold Abernathy. I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever show up. Sit down, son." I sat. The chair groaned in protest. "I was your grandfather's executor," he began, his voice a low rumble. "And his friend. When he passed, his instructions were very specific. The house and the land were to be held in trust for you until your 18th birthday. The taxes were to be paid from a separate account he'd set up. Everything else was contingent on you." "Contingent on me how?" "On you coming here," he said, leaning forward. He knew they'd tell you the place was worthless. He knew the system would push you to abandon it. He made a bet on his own blood. He believed that if you had his strength in you, you wouldn't just walk away. You'd come looking for answers. My throat was dry. I found his letter in the house. It mentioned a box, but I can't find the key. Abernathy gave a slow, knowing nod. He reached into a drawer of his desk and pulled out a small, sealed manila envelope. It was thick with age. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's familiar script. His instructions were to give you this only if you came to my office asking about the property. He wanted to be sure it was you making the choice, not just stumbling into it. He slid the envelope across the desk. I picked it up. Inside, I could feel the small hard shape of a key. This was it, the final piece. "Before you go rushing back there," Abernathy said, his tone turning serious, "you need to understand what you're walking into. Martha at the store probably gave you the town gossip version. Here's the legal one. Blackwood Development is a subsidiary of a much larger, much more ruthless corporation. They've spent millions acquiring the land around Sparrow Creek for a luxury resort and golf course. Your grandfather's 10 acres are right in the middle of their planned development. Without it, their project is hamstrung. They can't get the zoning permits they need." "So they tried to buy it," I said. "They tried everything," he corrected. "Lowball offers, then generous ones. When that didn't work, they moved on to intimidation, frivolous lawsuits, complaints to the county about code violations, cutting off his access road for repairs. Alistair fought them every step of the way. He knew the land was more valuable than they were letting on, but more than that, it was a matter of principle. It was his home. It was your mother's home." He paused, his gaze softening. Your grandfather was a good man, Leo. He made some hard choices. He believed he was keeping you safe. Opening that box, it's going to show you why. It won't be easy. The truth rarely is." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the quiet street. "Blackwood will know you're here by now. This is a small town. They'll come for you. They'll try to pressure you, scare you, convince you that you're in over your head and that selling is your only option." He turned back to me, his eyes sharp and clear. "Your grandfather believed you had his strength. I hope to God he was right." I walked back to the farmhouse with Abernathy's words ringing in my ears. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The world felt different now, sharper. The fight wasn't just a vague warning in a letter anymore. It was real, and it was coming for me. I clutched the envelope in my hand, the key inside a hard, promising weight. Back in the house, I used my new flashlight to navigate the dusty rooms. The darkness felt less menacing now, more like a quiet companion. I went straight to the hearth, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. I sat on the floor, took the metal box out of its hiding place, and carefully tore open the envelope from Abernathy. The small brass key fell into my palm. It was plain, simple, a stark contrast to the ornate iron key that had opened the front door. It slid into the padlock on the box perfectly. With a small click, the lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was packed tightly. There was no money, no jewels, no traditional treasure. It was a treasure of a different kind, a treasure of truth. On top was a stack of letters, tied with a piece of old twine. Beneath them was a rolled-up map, a slim leather-bound journal, and a single yellowed newspaper clipping. I picked up the journal first. The leather was soft and worn. The first page read, "Property of Alistair Miller." It was his. I spent the entire night on the floor by the cold hearth, reading by the beam of my flashlight. I started with the journal. My grandfather's entries began around the time Blackwood Development first arrived in Sparrow Creek. He chronicled their offers, their threats, his meetings with Abernathy. He wrote about his love for the land, his memories of raising my mother here, his grief after my grandmother Eleanor passed away. His voice came through the pages, steady and resolute, a man of quiet strength and unshakable principle. Then I untied the twine on the letters. The handwriting was different, more feminine, more urgent. They were from my mother. They were addressed to my grandfather, sent from an address in the city. I read as she wrote about falling in love with a charming, ambitious man, my father. I read as her early, happy letters slowly turned dark. She wrote about his business deals, his new, dangerous friends, his connection to a powerful man named Marcus Thorne, the founder of Blackwood Development. The story pieced itself together, a mosaic of love, fear, and betrayal. My father had gotten in deep with Thorne's criminal enterprises, which were funded by Blackwood's legitimate real estate business. He owed them money, a lot of it. He had tried to use my grandfather's land as collateral, but Alistair had refused. The fighting between them grew worse. My mother was caught in the middle, terrified for her safety and the safety of her unborn child, me. The final letter was almost illegible, stained with what looked like tears. She wrote that she was leaving him, that she was coming home to Sparrow Creek. She was afraid. She wrote, "He said Thorne won't let us just walk away. He said there are no clean breaks." That was the last letter in the stack. Then I read the newspaper clipping. It was an obituary. A small article from a city paper dated just a week after that final letter. It reported a single-car accident on a rain-slicked highway. The driver, a young woman, was killed instantly. Her name was Sarah Miller, my mother. An accompanying article mentioned that the police suspected no foul play, but my grandfather had circled the name of the investigating officer and written a single word in the margin. Thorns. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. It wasn't an accident. They had killed her, and my father. He had let them, or worse. The journal filled in the rest. My father had shown up at the farmhouse a week after the funeral, drunk and desperate, begging for money. He confessed that Thorne had arranged the accident as a message. My grandfather threw him out and never saw him again. He was terrified Thorne would come for me next, the only living link to the Miller land. So he did the only thing he could think of to make me disappear. He gave me a different last name on my birth records, a common one, and placed me in the state system, severing all official ties. The debt he'd mentioned in his first letter wasn't his. It was the debt of blood my father owed to Marcus Thorne. My entire life, the story of my abandonment, had been a lie. A terrible, necessary lie, crafted to save my life. Finally, I unrolled the map. It wasn't a property deed, it was a geological survey, commissioned privately by my grandfather. It showed the topography of his 10 acres, and running right through the middle of the property was a thick, dark vein, labeled Colton Deposit, high grade. I didn't know what coltan was, but a quick search on my phone told me. It was a rare metallic ore, a critical component in manufacturing smartphones, laptops, and other high-end electronics. It was incredibly valuable. Blackwood didn't want the land for a golf course. They wanted it for the mine. My grandfather's 10 acres weren't just in their way. They were the entire prize, and he had known it all along. The flashlight beam flickered and died, plunging me into the pre-dawn darkness. But it didn't matter. Everything was illuminated now. I sat there in the dark, the truth a crushing weight on my chest. This house wasn't a ruin, it was a fortress. My grandfather wasn't a defeated old man. He was a soldier who had died at his post, protecting the last piece of his family. And I was his heir, not just to the land, but to the fight. The next morning, a car came. It wasn't a dusty pickup truck like the ones I'd seen in town. It was a sleek black sedan that looked alien and predatory parked in the overgrown driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that was all teeth. He walked up to the porch as if he owned it. I was sitting on the top step, the metal box next to me. I had been waiting for him. "Leo, is it?" he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "My name is Mr. Jensen. I'm with Blackwood Development. I understand you've recently taken possession of this property." He gestured vaguely at the house, a look of distaste on his face. "It's my grandfather's house," I said, my voice steady. "Of course. Alistair was a colorful local character," he said, the word colorful dripping with disdain. "Look, I'll get straight to the point. We've been trying to consolidate the parcels in this area for a new community project. This little plot is the last holdout. Frankly, it's an eyesore and a legal headache for you. The back taxes alone will be a nightmare once your grandfather's prepayment runs out." He was lying. Abernathy told me the taxes were paid for 5 years. He opened a slim leather briefcase. "We're prepared to make you a generous offer to take this problem off your hands. $50,000, cash." He fanned a stack of $100 bills. "Think about it, kid. A fresh start. You could go anywhere, do anything. College, a car, a new life. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper. It's more than this dump is worth. Take the money. Start over. Forget this place ever existed." He slid a contract and a pen across the dusty porch floor toward me. $50,000. It was an astronomical sum. It was a ticket out of a life I'd never wanted. I could be anonymous. I could be safe. I could leave Sparrow Creek, leave the ghost and the fight and the pain behind me. For one dizzying, terrible moment, I was tempted. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to take the deal, to run. It was the easy way out, the smart way out. But then I looked past him, at the house. It wasn't just a dump. It was the house where my mother was born. It was the house my grandfather died defending. I looked at the metal box beside me, filled with his words, his sacrifice. I thought of my grandmother's journals, my mother's frightened letters, the geological map that held the secret truth. Selling this land wasn't just a real estate transaction. It was agreeing that their lives, their fight, meant nothing. It was letting Marcus Thorne win. It was selling my own story for cash. It was erasing the only home I'd ever truly had. I looked Mr. Jensen dead in the eye. My voice didn't shake. The land isn't for sale. His smile vanished. A flicker of cold anger crossed his face before he masked it again. Don't be a fool, kid. You have no idea what you're getting into. This is not a game you can win. I'm not playing a game, I said. I stood up, picked up the contract and tore it in half. I let the pieces fall at his feet. Now get off my property. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes hard. Then he turned without another word, got into his black car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. The choice was made. I wasn't running anymore. I was home, and I was going to fight for it. The moment the car disappeared, the adrenaline left me, and my legs started to shake. But it wasn't fear I felt. It was a strange, fierce clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I grabbed the box and walked all the way back into town, straight to Abernathy's office. I laid everything out on his cluttered desk, the journal, the letters, the newspaper clipping, and the geological survey. He read through everything in silence, his expression growing more grim with each page. When he finally looked up from the map, his tired eyes were blazing with a fire I hadn't seen before. "Colton," he whispered, tapping the map. "Son of a bitch." Alistair hinted that he thought there was something more here, but this is a smoking gun. This is why they were so relentless. This isn't just about a resort. It's a multi-million-dollar mining operation. He looked at me, a new respect in his gaze. They offered you $50,000 for this. That's not an offer. It's an insult. It's theft. They won't stop, I said. That man who came to the house, he threatened me. Let them try, Abernathy growled. He stood up and began pacing his small office, energized. This changes everything. Your grandfather's journal, your mother's letters. This isn't just a property dispute anymore. This is a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and it points to a motive for your mother's death. We can't prove murder after all these years, not without a confession, but we can sure as hell use it. We're not just going to defend, we're going on the attack. For the first time, I felt like I had an ally, a real one. What do? First, we file a restraining order against Blackwood and its employees, using the journal as evidence of past harassment. Then, we file a counterclaim for damages. We leak this survey to the county zoning board and the Environmental Protection Agency. A Colton mine is a messy, toxic business. The town will never approve it, not once they know what's at stake. We're going to tie them up in so much legal red tape they won't be able to move for years. He stopped pacing and looked at me. It'll be a long, ugly fight, Leo, and they'll fight dirty. But your grandfather spent years building this case. He left you an arsenal. Now, we use it. He grinned, a fierce, wolfish expression. I'll do it pro bono. My fee will be the pleasure of seeing the look on Marcus Thorne's face. Leaving his office, I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The fight ahead was daunting, but for the first time my future wasn't a terrifying blank space. It had a shape, a purpose. I walked back to the farmhouse not as an inheritor of a ruin, but as the defender of a home. The legal battle began immediately, just as Abernathy had predicted. Blackwood's lawyers responded with a flood of motions and countersuits. But we had the truth on our side. The story began to leak out in town. Martha, at the general store, became my biggest champion, telling everyone who would listen about how Alistair Miller's grandson was standing up to the corporate bullies. While the lawyers fought, I worked. I couldn't just sit and wait. The house needed me. I started with the basics. I swept away the thick layers of dust, the gray shroud of the past. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and let the fresh air and sunlight pour in for the first time in over a decade. The house began to breathe again. The work was hard and slow. I repaired the broken porch steps with lumber salvaged from a collapsed shed out back. I patched the leaky roof. I cleared the overgrown weeds from the yard, uncovering my grandmother's forgotten flower beds. Each task was a reclamation. I wasn't just fixing a building, I was healing a part of myself. I was earning my place here. The town started to help. One day, a grizzled farmer named Hank, my nearest neighbor a mile down the road, showed up with a chainsaw and helped me cut up a fallen tree that was blocking the driveway. He didn't say much, just grunted. Alistair was a good neighbor. Martha started dropping off boxes of groceries, refusing to take any money. "You'll need your strength for the fight," she'd say. I got a part-time job stocking shelves for her, earning enough to keep myself fed and buy supplies for the house. I was no longer the outsider, the orphan kid from the city. I was becoming part of Sparrow Creek. I was Miller's grandson. I belonged. The resolution didn't come in a dramatic courtroom victory. The legal battle dragged on, a slow war of attrition. Blackwood, faced with public opposition and a host of new environmental inquiries sparked by the leaked survey, had to halt their development plans. They hadn't given up, but their immediate threat had receded. They were wounded, snarling, but held at bay. My life found a new rhythm. Work at the store, work on the house, meetings with Abernathy. The house was still old, still scarred, still in need of 100 repairs. But it was warm. It was safe. It was mine. One evening, I built a fire in the hearth for the first time. As the flames crackled to life, chasing the chill from the room, I looked at the photograph on the mantel. My grandparents smiling in front of their proud white house. I felt a profound sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but I had survived the first battle. I had held the line. I had honored their sacrifice. I was home. I stand on this porch now, the one I rebuilt with my own 2 hands, and I look out over the land. The sun is setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It's quiet, but it's not an empty quiet anymore. It's the sound of crickets starting their evening song, of the wind whispering through the pines. It's the sound of peace. They told me I inherited nothing. A key to a derelict house. A liability. But they were wrong. My inheritance wasn't the house, or the land, or even the secret mineral wealth beneath it. My real inheritance was a story. It was a legacy of resilience, a lesson in what it means to stand your ground. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune to spend. He left me a reason to build a life. He left me a choice. The choice to run from my past, or to turn and face it. The choice to accept the story I was given, or to fight for the truth. Home isn't something you're just given. It's not 4 walls and a roof. It's the place where your story makes sense. It's the place you fight for. The place you build, nail by nail, memory by memory, until it becomes a part of you. This house still has its scars. So do I. But the broken windows have been replaced, and the light gets in now. They told me I inherited nothing. But they were wrong. I inherited a story, a fight, and a second chance. And maybe you have too. Maybe your inheritance isn't something you can hold in your hands, but something you have to build with them. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own fight, I hope you'll subscribe and join this community. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me what home means to you, because every story of finding where you belong deserves to be heard. And we're here to listen.